Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where 21st century educators come to share, learn, and be inspired. We believe in the growth mindset, creativity, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and strategic uses of education technology. Our mission is to share news and views from teachers who are crushing it in the classroom and making a difference for learners everywhere. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's jump into today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Dan Jones. Dan is the K-12 editor for Flipped Learning Review magazine. He's a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher and a flipped classroom PBL guru. He's also the author of Flipped 3.0, Project-Based Learning, an insanely simple guide. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Thank you so much for having me. I am so ready to talk education.
So good to have you here, and I have so many questions around PBL, so I can't wait to dig in. But first, why don't you tell our listeners about your current teaching context?
Sure. I am a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher at the Richland School of Academic Arts, and it's an inner city, high poverty school. We have a very diverse population that we work with, and I wear a lot of different hats here at the school, everything from my traditional classroom responsibilities to being the website director. I am a flipped learning trainer. I am also the K-12 editor, as you had mentioned, for the FLR magazine. I do blogging as well, and I just finished my first book.
That is a lot of hats, Dan, and you've got a lot going on. But I have to say, a lot that interests me as well, particularly the social studies hats.
Awesome.
And the writing, the blogging, the technology, and the PBL. I really look forward to hearing more about that. I'm a kind of a PBL newbie. But Dan, we're going to start with a low moment that you faced in your teaching or education career. And then, just as importantly, how did you overcome it?
Sure. The lowest moment in my educational career came 7 years ago when I decided that I could not continue to teach anymore. I hated my job. I felt ineffective. I was depressed. All of the tools in my educational toolbox no longer worked. And I truly felt like I was walking into battle every single day. It was common, or it is common, for teachers to experience any one of those emotions at some point through any given school year. But I was experiencing them all at once, and it went on for months. And I distinctly remember a day when I was standing in front of my students delivering a lesson, and I had kids looking out the window. Some were engaged in private conversations, while the rest just seemed to be staring at me blankly. And I did what I thought, good teachers do. They called on the students that weren't paying attention to try to draw their attention back into the lesson. And that was like throwing gasoline on the fire. They decided to play the "I'm not talking to you" game. And I believe it was at that moment that my passion for teaching died. I knew, though, that I had to talk to somebody about this. And I think that's one of the things that really added to my frustration and ineffectiveness as a teacher was I kept it all to myself. And we really do need to, as educators, we need people to talk to, because the social emotional well-being of educators is something that has to be a priority. And so I hadn't done that. And I think that is one of the things that did impact where I was mentally. So I knew, though, that I had to talk to somebody about what I was experiencing. And so I turned to my administrators, Sandra Sutherland and Michelle Gorman. We all sat down in Sandra's office, and I explained that I was going to be finished with teaching at the end of the school year. And instead of being upset with me, each administrator took the time to gently encourage me not to quit. And Sandra actually told me, she said, "I'm not going to allow you to quit." But what she did say was that I was right, that I couldn't continue to teach the way that I had been teaching. She went on to say that I needed to find a new way of approaching my students. And I thought to myself, how else do you teach? You stand in front of kids, tell them what they need to know. They go home, memorize it, and then they spit it back to you on a test. And then you press the repeat button for the next lesson. Now, I wasn't that bland in my presentation of materials. I told lots of stories, and I had kids do projects. We even, I integrated as much technology into my classroom as possible, but it wasn't about them. And so I left that meeting not feeling real encouraged, but challenged. I knew in my heart, though, that there was nothing out there. I was not going to find any life-changing instructional method. My meeting with my administrators, I kind of equate it to like the hero's journey, in that at the beginning of a hero's journey, you have your mentors. Your mentors call on the hero to go on a quest, and the hero tells the mentors, "No, I'm not going to do that. This journey is not for me." And that's essentially where I was. The people who I admired and looked up to said, "You need to go do this," and I essentially said, "You know what? Not going to happen." And so after, leaving the meeting and whatnot, I did go and I did look. And to my surprise, when I typed in to the search bar, new and innovative instructional methods, and it was, I don't want to say passive aggressive, but in a way it kind of was, because I was like, well, what out there is going to be new and innovative? And our profession has remained unchanged for 150 years. We always stand at the front of the room, have our students face us, and we tell them what they need to know. And so when I hit, enter on my search, what came back was flipped learning. The only problem I encountered as I looked at flipped learning was that none of it had anything to do with social studies and reading and language arts. Every piece of it had to do with math and science. But the more I read about flipped learning, that didn't bother me, because I could see how it could be used in a social studies classroom and how it could be used in a reading and language arts classroom. And the instructional method, it made so much sense that even as I sat in my chair, I could feel my passion for teaching start to be resurrected. Life was all of a sudden being given back to what I knew I was being called to do. So with flipped learning, the thing about it that made the most sense to me was the fact that it allowed me the time to do what I had always wanted to do. And that's actually work with my students. For so long, we've told kids what they needed to know, and then we've sent them home to do all the hard stuff. And then they have no one at home that can actually help them. So that's the time when they actually needed me. And so what flipped learning does is it flips where those things occur. So my instruction now takes place in what's termed the individual space. So that could be at home, on the bus, wherever. The kids can be acquiring that new information. And then when they go to apply it, that's done in the group space here in the classroom. So I can sit down side by side with a student who is struggling, and I can be the one who is walking them through it. And the student who isn't struggling is able to apply that new knowledge in a way that's meaningful to them. And so discovering flipped learning, to me, it was almost like being given a magical item in the hero's journey. It was something that was going to aid me in my quest. That as I walked back into my classroom, I now had the tool that I needed to be more successful, more passionate than I had ever been in my career.
Dan, that's a great story. And I love how you were sort of at the end of your rope and your administrators just would not let you throw in the towel. You dug into the research and you came up with this idea of the flipped classroom. So I want to push on that just a little bit further. You've published this book called Flipped 3.0 Project-Based Learning, an insanely simple guide. So talk to us about that combination of the flipped classroom, or as you put it, Flipped 3.0 PBL. How do those two things go together? Explain that 3.0 part for us.
With Flipped Learning 3.0, it would kind of insinuate that there's been a 1.0 and a 2.0. And the reason we're at a 3.0 is because flipped learning is an alive, organic, evolving method of instruction. And when we say 3.0, there are essentially 5 different things that it covers. The fact that it's not static. So it is always changing. And it's actually changing because of 3 things: the research that's being done, the innovation that's occurring in the classrooms, and the new technology that is constantly coming out. And we're seeing the fact that this isn't an isolated method of reaching kids. This is being done all over the world. And I've worked with teachers in Iceland, Australia, Spain, Iran, New Zealand, China, Japan, everywhere. People are looking at their classrooms and saying, well, education's been fundamentally done the exact same way from the get-go. Teachers are standing at the front of their rooms, and it doesn't even matter if you're in the Himalaya mountains. The teacher is still at the front, and students are in rows facing their teacher. And flipped learning allows teachers the time to move out from that spot and work amongst their students. And so it is a global change to education. And it's rapidly expanding what educators are able to do. And so there's also the simple fact that flipped learning, it's not a way you teach kids. And I think that has been some of the evolution of like the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, is that flipped learning was seen as, well, it's a new way to teach kids. And you have to stop doing what you were doing and do things completely differently. And that's not the case, because I was doing PBL in my classroom, and I had a unit here or a unit there, and I wasn't doing it correctly, mind you, and I definitely wasn't doing it to its full potential. But flipped learning, it is a meta strategy. And the easiest way to explain it is PBL is like an app, and flipped learning is your operating system. And it's what powers the instructional method that you're using. So if you love inquiry or you love to use mastery in your classroom, those things are awesome. Gamification, outstanding. And you can continue to do that. But now flipped learning, what it does is it powers that so that you have the time to do it well. And so when I started to flip my class and I was able to pair it with PBL, all of a sudden I could do PBL with every single unit, and I could give students choice in how they were going to approach every single project. And the kids all of a sudden became alive in the class. They were very active. It turned a very passive learning environment into a very active learning environment. And I would have 25 different projects going on in my class. And that would seem insane to a traditional environment. And, how do you grade 25 different projects? My answer to that's very simple. Use the standards. The standards are what guide the grading of all of the different work. But the work that the kids are doing now is meaningful because it's their project. It's not something that I created for them. I give them an opportunity to go through what it's called the design lab. And the students do all this pre-research. I give them an essential question that says, look, this is what you have to be able to answer by the end of the unit, this one question. And it's usually a how or why sort of question. Something that's definitely not a yes or no and not a very simply stated response. And so I give the kids that question, and they go home and they do as much research as they possibly can, because I want them to walk in as an expert. I want them to feel confident that they know something about the topic when they walk into my class. And they can have an intelligent conversation with their peer. And they can say, this is what I found out. And what did you find out? And their peer can say, well, I found this cool piece out. And so they're having dialogue. And the entire time that they're talking, their brain is thinking, how can I represent this? And so it becomes a very individual moment where they can say, this is what I want to do for a project. And I have kids that have made Minecraft worlds centered around content, and because they love to game and they love that particular game. And I've had students who have made some of the most creative things that there's no possible way I could have ever come up with that idea, but their brain did. And they are so excited about their idea and how they're going to use this concept so that they can bring everything that they have learned and directly apply it in the classroom.
That is so cool, Dan. There's so much there that I want to touch on. You're talking about design thinking, right? You're talking about student agency and ownership and self-directed learning. And you mentioned standards-based grading, the idea that, it's okay if students are doing different kind of representations of learning because we're grading against standards. We're not worried about a point system. So many good things that you're touching on, and I have so many questions. You know what? We will move on, but let me ask you a couple quick ones. First of all, I know you have a YouTube channel, but do you use that? Do you utilize your own YouTube content for the flipped part when students are consulting educational videos at home? Are those videos that you are making, or are you directing them to other online content?
I use both options, and I also use reading material as a third option. That, hey guys, I want you to go home and I want you to read this. And when they come back in, we discuss it. And they see, okay, this is how this connects to this. And they make all these different connections just based on a reading. But I do have a YouTube channel, and I do post a lot of my videos on that channel. But sometimes there are videos that are awesome and have a higher budget than what I do. And so the History channel is a great resource because they're able to bring in people from different universities, and they're able to dialogue about content and do reenactments and such. But I do feel that it is important for teachers to create as many of their own videos as possible, because your students connect with you. And even if, it's the video is just you giving the information on a whiteboard or a forward board, a light board of sorts, then they're connecting with you. They like you. And so they're more willing to watch you. And your videos don't always have to be perfect. That's the other thing I learned, is your videos don't have to be perfect. You're used to messing up in class. They're going to be okay with you messing up in a video. And just be you. And so that is definitely an option, is to post everything on YouTube. Now, my process, my workflow is a little differently in that I do create my videos, I put them on YouTube, but then I also use a program called PlayPosit. And I upload from YouTube to PlayPosit. And what that program does is, because the question always comes up, well, how do you know if the kids are even watching your videos? And this particular program lets me know who watched the video. It lets me know how long it took them to watch the video. Because the great thing with having the students watch your lecture in video form is that they can pause you. They can rewind you. Because when I was in school, I was the kid, this will date me a little bit, but we were using overheads, an overhead projector, and the transparencies. And I was always the kid who was not done taking notes. And so I would raise my hand that I would need the transparency handed to me. And everybody's waiting on me to finish taking notes. And so what flipped learning does is it allows kids to take notes in private. They can take notes as slowly as they want. And that builds so much confidence for kids because they're not self-conscious in the classroom. And if something doesn't make sense, they can always rewind me. So what PlayPosit does is it allows me to understand how long it took someone in the class to watch the video. Did they skip through it? And, it took them 30 seconds to watch a 4-minute video. Well, that's a red flag. And then I'm also able to put questions into my videos. So the video will actually stop, ask the student a question, and record their answer. So I know what their answers were, how long it even took them to answer the question, who got it right, who got it wrong, so that when I walk into class the next day, I am very prepared for the conversations that are going to occur.
Wow, that is fantastic, and would love to learn more about the technology you're using there. But I would definitely point the listeners toward Dan's channel. It's at Dan Jones on YouTube. Look for the guy with the necktie. And so there's a little plug for the Dan Jones YouTube channel. Pretty cool stuff. So Dan, moving on, outside of education, what's another area of passion and learning for you? We call ourselves lifelong learners, right? So tell us about an area that interests you and maybe why you enjoy it.
One of the things that I love to do just to kind of relax is I make pens. I turn wood and acrylic, and I make pens and just anything that you can make round out of something square. And my dad and I had started making pens probably 3 years ago, and my wife had purchased me a kit to make a shaving brush and a razor so that my dad and I could do it together. Little did she know that her gift would turn into me purchasing a lathe and making my own pens, pencils, razors, shaving brushes, bottle openers, all sorts of stuff, Christmas ornaments.
Wow.
And so one of the things that I love about this is that it's cathartic.
Right.
It's just me, a block of wood, and my creative vision. And I can make a finished product start to finish in like 2 hours. And I make pens, for myself, my friends, my family. And it's something where I really don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. I can just kind of tune things out, throw my music on, and relax.
I love it. I feel like I'm not really a maker, or at least not that kind of a maker myself, but I feel like there's another YouTube channel in there somewhere, Dan. So very, very, very cool little hobby. Next, kind of in a similar vein, share with us about a personal habit that contributes to your success.
I do try to carve out some time that's for me. I am in what I would call an introverted extrovert. I need time to re-energize, and I just need quiet time, even if that's just me with music or listening to a podcast. I need it to not be filled with kids talking at me or being hyper around me. This time, it just allows me to be the best me that I can be when I am around kids who are saying, Mr. Jones, Mr. Jones, Mr. Jones, or even, my own 3 children at home who love to sing and dance. I feel like I learn more and more how important it is to take care of myself so that I can give the best of myself to those that are around me.
Love that message. Can't agree more. And I know Dave Burgess over at Teach Like a Pirate would definitely agree. There's a lot of truth in just that idea that we've got to develop ourselves. We've got to explore our own unique passions in order to be the best educator we can be. We've got to move on now, Dan, into some rapid fire recommendations. So give us your top 1 or 2 picks here. We'll start at Twitter, which is kind of the chief place for every educator's PLN. Tell us who we need to be following there and why.
I would say you have to follow Jon Bergmann. His handle is at Jon Bergmann, and there's no H, 2 N's. He is constantly developing ways to support educators. He recently launched the Flip Learning Global Initiative at flglobal.org. On the site, he's got 30,000+ educators that are engaged in a constant conversation, constant dialogue about flip learning in different forums. And they've got a forum for gamification, forums for using Google, just all sorts of different conversations that are going. And he's developed training for people who want to learn how to flip. And so he posts those things on Twitter constantly. And his message is the simple fact that we need to reach every student, and we can do that. There doesn't have to be that one kid who's sitting in the corner that no one has ever talked to. We can reach every single kid because we now have the time to do it.
That's an awesome message, and I'm going to second that vote for Jon. I'm following him as well, and so make sure you grab Jon Bergmann, get a hold of his content. We're moving on, Dan, to an edtech tool. Now, you're a techie kind of guy. You're also a maker, so I'm really interested to hear your answer here. What's your pick for an edtech tool that maybe teachers haven't been using but need to start utilizing in their practice?
Well, as I stated before, PlayPosit is awesome. But the other tool and that's more for the individual space. My group space go-to tool is Kahoot. The kids love it. They can compete against one another, and they can acquire points as they are answering questions. And they always want to win. I never have a prize, though, for the winner. They just like to compete and be able to say that they won. And so it's a phenomenal tool to get kids excited and energized in the classroom.
Oh, that tool has revolutionized middle school classrooms everywhere. So
Amen to that.
If you haven't jumped on, make sure you get a hold of that one. Moving on to books. Tell us about one that you've been reading lately, or maybe share one of your all-time faves and tell us why you recommend it.
I just finished reading a book called Disruptive Thinking, and it changes how we ask questions. It is one of the most challenging books that I've read in a long time because it challenges me to grow students differently and develop their passion differently. Because, kids start out in school excited to read, and they're so excited to learn how to read. And then somewhere they develop this disdain for reading. They hate it. They hate doing it. And it's because we've become so rigid in, you're going to read this chapter and answer these 10 questions that I've created for you that are strictly about content. And the kids have completely detached themselves from the reading to the point where they don't believe that they need to. And so it is something that truly I would recommend getting your hands on. It will revolutionize your classroom.
I've got 2 more questions for you, Dan. Next one, are you a podcast listener? And if so, recommend a podcast that you're enjoying and tell us why we need to add it to our podcast deck.
There's actually a production piece to this that anything that's put out by BAM Radio Network is awesome. And of course, Jon Bergmann's podcast, Flip Learning Worldwide, is great. But there's a lot on the BAM Radio Network that is just outstanding.
Cool. All right. We'll take a look for Flipped Learning Worldwide. And then last question, Dan, just for fun, you're at the end of your day, you're not making pens, you've got no energy left for lesson plans or videos on YouTube. What are you watching on Netflix?
The Office. Can't go wrong with The Office. So much, of real life is just super serious and depressing that, a good dose of comedy is always good, especially before bed.
Always a good time. I'm going to agree with you there as well. Dan, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing some of your insights with the audience. What's the best way to get to know you better and pick up more of your content?
They can always follow me on Twitter at Ideas for Teacher, or on Instagram, Ideas for Teachers. You can go to my website, which is flippedtrainer.weebly, and that's 2 E's in Weebly.com. Right. And I also have my professional Facebook page, and that's if you just look for Mr. Dan Jones on there. I'm the guy in the bow tie.
I like that trademark, Dan. That sets you apart a little bit, and it makes me think that's a pretty cool guy. He's coming up with some good stuff. So once more for the listeners, make sure you check out Flip 3.0, Project-Based Learning, an insanely simple guide. Thank you for not saying for dummies there, but an insanely simple guide. And that's a good invitation for any of us who are curious about both flipped learning and PBL to learn a little bit more. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Dan. Have a great summer.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Teachers on Fire, where teachers come to share, learn, and be inspired. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review on iTunes, and follow us on Twitter at Teachers on Fire. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, saying goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time, right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.